Hey, I'm your host, Bree Wild, and this is Marquee Memories. Here we sit down with your favorite artists to talk about their top concert memories as fans. Today's guest is not known for being in a band, but for discovering, breaking, and mentoring bands. He's the founder of the longest-running touring music festival in North America, started in 1995 and is thriving today in its new form as the Multi-City Destination Festival. The patriarch of Vans Warped Tour, Kevin Lyman. Welcome.
Hi, Bree. How are you today?
Good, good. All right, so before we get into your memories, I want to talk a little bit about Warp's transformation from its traveling circus to what it is now.
Yeah, well, the 2019, I kind of wrapped it up in a bow after 25 years. And I'd become a full-time professor at the University of Southern California. And my touring days were I felt were kind of coming down to an end. And I think we ended up at the right time since a global pandemic started in 2020. And I would have probably been bankrupt right around that point. But I had a great moment in time where, the Insomniac, who does EDC and a lot of the largest electronic dance music festivals, gave me a call at the right moment. Literally, it was like 10 minutes. I went over. Pasquale with Insomniac he talked to me about how he learned a lot from going to Warped Tour and learning about it. And a lot of my former crew worked over there. So it literally took us about 10 minutes to put the idea of coming back. And we came back last year in 2025. And we're back again in 2026 and adding a couple international dates in Mexico City and Montreal. So on a roll again.
I don't want to give the pandemic too much credit, but do you think there was kind of a cultural attitude shift after we got live music taken away from us?
Oh, absolutely. I think, being able to talk to young people on a daily basis at school, I realized that, potentially there was a whole segment of the population that going to live shows was not in their DNA, because those formative years of, when they're 18 to 20, maybe 16 to 20, a lot of them, they didn't get a chance. So they had different interests, whether they were gaming, whether they were crocheting or, things such as that. But two things came out of it. One, a lot of bands were formed, a lot of musicians, a lot of songs were written. But I think, the price point of concerts kind of went up so much. A lot of people couldn't experiment by going to a festival. And there's a lot of amazing festivals out there. But we decided that I thought it'd come back, and if we could do something at that Warped ticket price or as close as we could in this day and age, maybe we can get some young people out to a festival again.
I know you gave a couple TED Talks about 10 years ago, and you said your demo was 13 to 19. Is it still 13 to 19?
Well, it's one of those things. I did not want to play to the nostalgia. Of course, you're going to pay homage to that period of time because that's important. But I was looking forward to the future of bands and lifestyle and community, basically, because there are so many great bands. I took a little trip out in a bandwagon with Summer School, one of the other projects I work on, and I was on the road for a week with that. And trust me, a body like mine bouncing around in a bandwagon, bands could tell you stories about that for forever, riding in those. But I started to look at young people sitting out in front of the venues, communicating, and that bill, though fewer bands, is revolving, highlighting new music. I was like, well, maybe we can throw a spark on it and see if we could build this out. So our average age that came to Warped Tour last summer we could figure out was about 27. So younger when you think about it. And then looking at this year's ticket sales, if we can, look at, it's about 2 to 1 new credit card users. So maybe we are engaging that young fan. And that's really what I wanted to do. I've always been about new bands and trying to build it because it's exciting.
How do bands pitch you to be on Warped Tour?
How do the bands pitch you? Well, they could show up in your driveway like they used to. And my wife felt safe that when they had mohawks, she felt like, we're safe. She told me a story about one night there was about 9 o'clock at night. I wasn't there. And she saw 5 guys walking down the driveway and they had leather jackets and mohawks. And she says, they must be looking for Kevin to pitch their band. And they were. That was one way. We used to have a thing in Altadena where I live. Everyone would come over in September, October, and it was gathering of the labels, agencies, management companies, and then bands would come by and we'd have barbecue in my backyard. It was just kind of this rolling, talking about music. One of my most exciting times was that period. Nowadays, I have a great booker at Insomniac. Her name is Amanda. And Amanda, right now, she's on phone calls right now talking with all the agencies, and we'll catch up later this afternoon. She was over this week, and we're starting to outline the 2027 tour.
That's amazing. Yeah, you have Warped Tour went away when I discovered the band Winona Fighter.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, they would be perfect for it. So now.
Yeah, Winona Fighter's also on the Summer School tour.
Oh, nice.
So the nice thing with Summer School is they'll route do about 22 shows, and then they're going to end at the Warped Tour in Long Beach.
Perfect.
And you'll have to stay till 8 o'clock.
I'm going to be ready this year.
Better get some rest.
I'm going to be ready this year. Should we jump into your first memory?
Warped Tour, Saltair Amphitheater, Salt Lake, 1995. We literally met in the parking lot of my warehouse out in Montclair, California, and we had a clipboard with everyone's names on it because the bands were sharing vehicles back then. Oh, wow. So it was interesting because we had Sublime was riding around with Orange 9mm. We had L7 with No Use for a Name. And it was just like a summer camp. You're checking in, some skaters checking. I couldn't figure out. And we had to get driving because we couldn't afford plane tickets to Salt Lake. This is like how shoestring this was. We had old tour buses, and we all had to meet at the parking lot, and there was extra people, and I couldn't figure out who was who. So I told them all to jump in the bus. We drove up through, and we stopped at a buffet in Las Vegas, and everyone was so excited that the bus drivers had to drive us down the strip. A lot of people hadn't been to Las Vegas. Some of these people that had been there, and the driver, I remember him looking at me going, I think there's some people we left behind because there was like 3 guys on skateboards skating down the strip trying to catch the buses. Oh, no. And we drove all night, and we got to Saltair Amphitheater, which is right outside Salt Lake City. And by then I was trying to always mix it up. Like, you never know what's going to happen at Warped. It's the festival between the stages is sometimes interesting, like the bands. And we built this climbing wall, and it was this giant like house. It's not those cool ones you see now. And everyone was like punk rock and climbing, whatever, Kevin. This guy had built it for me, and we had it in the truck, and it took everyone to get off the truck, and we set it up. And I'll never forget, and it really stuck in my mind, that the doors opened and this young person runs up with a mohawk. He had another mohawk. It's always mohawks. And he looks at me and he goes, dude, how much to climb the wall? And I was like, have we become that in society where you have to ask, you paid for a ticket? And I just go, free. And the guy looked at me and goes, well, how am I going to get paid? I said, I'll figure that out later. And that's where Warped wanted to, and that's where we started doing these things that, the fans could come in and, they came in to hear punk rock, but all of a sudden he's on a climbing wall. Yeah. And that person right now is probably 50 years old, maybe, or 45. I'd love to meet that person. So if you're out there and you had a little mohawk in Salt Lake City, track me down one day, I'd love to thank you.
So that was the first Warped Tour, and you were the organizer. Yeah.
I was a production manager in Los Angeles with Golden Voice, LA. I was running 320 shows a year in town. And I was every night, and I'd see these audiences, the metal crowd, the punk crowd, and everyone. And I was working all these shows, and I kept thinking that this music's so important, but it's not getting any radio play. It's not getting exposure that potentially Warped was the catalyst to bring the audiences together. Plus my background of doing, board aid and boarding for breast cancer and doing all the action sports stuff. Used to pay the Red Hot Chili Peppers $250 to play on top of a skate ramp at a contest. And that's where I was in the snow up in Big Bear. We were doing a board aid show that was to bring people together to raise money for AIDS research at that point. And I convinced Perry Farrell to sing Mountain Song. I was also the first stage manager of Lollapalooza, and he was in Porto for Pyros, and he did Mountain Song, and everyone bored across. It was crazy. Snowball fight, people snowboarding. But I'd heard about the X Games coming. And
nice.
So, and I heard that, I go, this lifestyle is going to be on TV. I better go do something myself before I'm working for someone else. So it was really that Warped Tour spawned off of that.
One of the things about Warped Tour has always been that it's been a very level playing field for all the bands.
Yeah.
Like you wake up, you don't know, your favorite band could be on at 11:30. How did you adapt that? I know it's not exactly the case now, but how do you still keep it a level playing field?
Well, it's going back, that all came from my traveling with Lollapalooza in 1991. I was the first stage manager. I'd never been on the road. That was my first tour. Most people start in a van. All of a sudden, I'm out on this big tour, and having Henry Rollins playing at 1:20 in the afternoon every day, and if you're probably too young to know Henry Rollins too much, but I won't rip off my shirt. But he had his shirt and black shorts, and he was just so intense. But he was playing for empty seats or fields, and I was kept thinking on the side of the stage, wouldn't it be cool if he got to play right between Susie and the Banshees and Jane's Addiction tonight? His career would have changed, and these people's minds would have been blown. So that's where, and then it was when I started Warped Tour, I was like, how are we going to get these young bands, if they're always opening, to give them the exposure to make them the next headliners. So by mixing that lineup every night, did that in a way. And it also challenged the bands because of working all those nights in the clubs. I'd see how people got complacent being the opening band, the second band, things like that. That by mixing it up, you never knew who you're going to be playing. The early slot, sometimes there's that old Warped Tour thing that if you partied too much the night before, you got the early slot. That's a little bit of the case sometimes because it kind of kept everyone in check. It was a self-monitoring tool I had. But I wanted to really challenge bands and help break bands, and I just felt that was a good tool.
Yeah, it was great. I love seeing Andrew WK both at 1 p.m. and at 8 p.m.
Yeah, and now it's a little tricky, but I really believe we had this discussion this week that we have to work really hard to take these bands like Winona Fighter and Honey Revenge and Lolo and push them hard and put them in front of some tough, bigger crowds and get them exposed because there's so much amazing talent out there when you've got Paradox, Magnolia Park. I believe we're breeding a whole new generation of headliners.
Yeah. And Warped is still about the music discovery aspect of it as much as it was before.
I would hope so. I would hope so. It's a little harder being that we're just on weekends, but it's the whole way we roll out the bands with individual videos. We give them each their moment because as you talk to the people across the country, they look at a poster of a festival, and a lot of them decide within 2 lines if it's a good festival. And Warped was never about that headliner, as we know. I was the first person to list bands alphabetically on a poster, and it's about digging deep. So those individual videos, and we're right in the middle of our video awards this year. We're giving awards out to the best creation of a video. And I really think that helps those bands because the youngest band or smallest band on the festival can get up to 200,000 views on that video.
Yeah, nice. Anything else about that first Warped Tour in Salt Lake City?
There's always me kicking Sublime off because I said no dogs and no friends, and they brought their dog and their friend to New York, so I had to send them home for a couple days. We just were getting down the road, and we didn't care. We didn't know better. I mean, we actually had a promoter in Denver thought he canceled the show. Oh my God. And we went ahead and set up the show ourselves, and we did a show we just let people come in, and then at the end, when he called me to yell that he lost money, he was a yeller. So we don't have as many yellers in the business as we used to. He's yelling at me about him losing money, and I had to thank him for the bonus. And he starts screaming louder, and I go, "Yeah, you didn't even send a concession stand." So we went out and bought a barbecue, and we were selling the kids hot dogs and sodas for $1 each, and I made a couple grand selling the kids that showed up at the thing. So we were just getting down the road, and we literally didn't know better. I just was so determined. But the biggest thing was, it was after all those years, 13 years of working, making other people look good, and building things out, that I was allowed to fail. Ultimately, I was allowed to fail that first year and get that second chance. And within my own scene of music, when Pennywise and NOFX we did back-end deals before the agents wouldn't talk to me, but the bands we met, down at a clothing company called Billabong, met with Pennywise. Had some beers with Fat Mike in an alley in Austin, and they wanted to come. They had heard it was different. They wanted to be part of it.
I like that the Warped Tour seems to have like these legacy bands that are just ingrained in part of it. I feel like Less Than Jake is one.
Absolutely.
Bad Religion. They're just, bands that are always there.
Well, that's what I like. Great live bands. You have to be a great live band. Yeah. And, we were talking earlier, and you said you love Less Than Jake. And, everyone knows their circle pit around the mixed position, and just they're great to have around. They're a band that's, I used to manage them a long time ago, and I guess my claim to fame was I got them to open for Bon Jovi. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't know that.
No one wanted to open for the Bon Jovi return tour. They didn't know if it was going to work. And I convinced them. I said, and so this strange ska band opened for Bon Jovi, and it was really a nice time for me that was my greatest accomplishment as a manager. I wasn't a good manager. I'd think big pictures or just try to help them out. And Less Than Jake's always welcome. I was excited about, my love of ska is anyone will know, whether that's, getting the Dance Hall Crashers back together for 20 years. I told them.
How did you get them back together?
Well, every year I'd go to Austin at least once a year, and Elise is awesome. And I'd say, "Hey, Elise, when are you getting back together?" Nope. And then I was went down to Austin City Limits right after I decided to do Warped Tour. And I said, "Look, I'm only going to ask you one time. There's one more time I'm going to ask you." And she says, maybe. So about a week later, she called me and says, "We're in." And they were great. Now they're doing shows again. And this year it was more like, I love Les and Jake. You got, but then Real Big Fish. They haven't played a show in 5-6 years, and I called Aaron. I started sending covert messages and to say, hey, wouldn't it be great? And it was awesome because I would do a charity golf tournament, and I'm walking, and it's been a long time since a strange blonde woman runs up and jumps in my arms. And she jumped in my arms, and it was his wife thanking me for getting him off the couch and getting the band back together. Been working real hard with trying to get a few other bands together. I think the Boss Tones should play again.
That would be great.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah. I imagine part of the success of, Warped Tour was building a team of people who had the same vision as you.
Oh gosh, that's every layer of that, in a strange way. Simply like to say I worked with people that gave a crap, that the smallest tent to the production manager, everyone had to pull together each day because we only had 3 hours to set up 20 semi-trucks of equipment and 600-700 people on the road, sometimes more, get everything organized each morning. So everyone had to kind of get in this flow. And it was a nice way for just motivated people, and I see so many of them out there now. And someone said, what's your legacy? I go, I can walk backstage at any festival or almost any tour, and there's someone kind of that was involved with me at some point. Because when we started out, Warped Tour was kind of looked down at by the rest of the industry. We were the outcast crew, we were the bands, but I never wanted to be in that setting. I did world tours for Nine Inch Nails, Stone Temple Pilots, Porno for Pyros, and I felt it was just a different way to do things. I wanted to stay in the business, so I had to create my own kind of chaos where touring is very routine. People like routine when you tour. I like a little of controlled chaos, which Warped absolutely was. And everyone pulled together, and I really realized that what it was I got off tour, and we went to Subway, and they had the great promotion. Remember the $5 footlong?
Yeah.
Right now we could all use it with these gas prices, right? A $5 footlong, you can get 2 meals out of that footlong sandwich. And we were in line, and all of a sudden I started hearing, when that mayo bottles like farts when there's nothing coming out?
Yeah.
And I'm like watching this, and the guy's just sliding the sandwiches by, but no mayo's going in the sandwich. And right in the middle, I yell, stop. I just go, stop. And I go, you could have the greatest, yell it out. This could be the greatest promotion in the world, but if these people go back to their offices and there's no mayo on their sandwich, Subway is effed. I was like, and the girls that work for me were like, okay, Kevin, let's go back to the office. You're good. But that was the thing. It was everyone had to really care to be out there. Shelley, who's become the biggest caterer, you've probably had her food backstage at one of the shows backstage in LA. She does all the tours, was my PA. And the food was so bad on the first few Warped Tours, she said, I could do better than this. And now she does Coachella, Stagecoach, Hollywood Bowl, the Greek Theater, the Forum. Every big show in LA, she's running the catering backstage. So you see how people just cared.
Yeah. I was on Warped Tour in 2008 as an embedded blogger for a website called BuzzNet. That was the best I ever ate on a tour.
Oh, yeah. I always said that, 90% of the people ate better on Warped Tour than they ever normally does. And the other 10% were the bands that made the most money. They can go out and buy something.
Do whatever they want. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I'm so glad you got Tensile Clash back together. Who else is on your list to get back together besides Boston's?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm taking it one at a time. Taking it one at a time. I think there's a moment in time when bands should get back. Who's on your list? Maybe you can tell me who to get back together.
I just saw No Doubt at the Sphere.
Yeah.
They were on your first one, right?
They were on the first Warped Tour in 95. Yeah. I remember we do these ska shows in LA where it was like 13 bands in a day, and they'd be like band number 11. And I was sitting with Paul Tollett. Paul, who does Coachella, and me went to school together. So I was working with him, and we both looked at each other one time, and we said, man, if they could ever get out of the clown suits, because they used to wear clown suits on stage, kind of. I said, if they ever got out of the clown suits and let her be the star, and you saw that sometimes, and they got out of the clown suits, and she's been quite a star, and I'm glad they've pulled this together. I hear it's a fabulous show.
It's so good.
I was thinking about it, like if I had any time, I'd probably have to go up and see it.
If you have time, yeah. All right, let's go to Pearl Jam.
Pearl Jam, Lollapalooza, Chicago, 1992. I said Chicago because that whole summer was insane. I was out stage event, and Pearl Jam was playing second on the bill. So everyone was trying to get to Lollapalooza. Like, usually roll in later. but everyone was in the venues. And the minute Eddie Vedder walked on stage, it was like, I don't know, Moses with the Red Sea caving in around. The crowd was a wave coming down. And my whole job was to like try to keep the venue under control. You know, I was so beat up from catching kids and they're jumping. Then Eddie would climb to the top of amphitheaters and swing from rafter to rafter, like literally no net, just no safety, just going for it. And you knew that if we could get through that, like 35, 40-minute set, Jesus and Mary Chain were next, and they were the most boring band in the world. So everyone would just calm down. But it was just seeing that energy was really, you know, I'd worked a lot of shows, but that was a force that I had never seen, was just a band. He just walked out. Didn't, you know, when you always have these things where bands can go up and say, come on down, get on stage.
Right, but they didn't have to.
But he didn't even have to. It was just the first note, everyone wanted to become so close. That was quite memories. And I think that's led to about half of my 7 surgeries I've had because I felt like I was playing football every afternoon, you know, as linebacker on that stage.
Were you part security?
Well, I was always in the middle of it. I took part a lot, but I spent a lot of time in barricades. I mean, I designed some of the first barricades. I know bands hate me. I mean, I'm sure a Turnstile fan's going to go, fuck him. I don't know if I cuss, but it was like, I worked in the clubs, and you know, Iggy Pop was swinging on a rafters at a venue in Long Beach. Was swinging on a rafter and broke my nose for like the second time with his boot. And I said, we got to do something here to kind of separate the bands, because I can't be doing it. And that was my job every night. I'd set up the dressing rooms, I'd load in the bands, and then we played security all night.
The barricades, yeah. I remember maybe it was my Pearl Jam moment was when I was on Warped Tour in 2008, Paramore played a few shows.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the fleet of ambulances backstage, because you were like, kids are going to go nuts. We're just completely prepared.
And they were young, and a lot of people that were coming to Warped Tour weren't necessarily prepared for an outdoor festival. So that was kind of that moment where everyone was running to the barricade. First saw it in 2005 when My Chem and Fall Out Boy, and we had that television show, TRL.
Yeah.
And TRL... And all of a sudden, we had this moment in time. It was Avenged Sevenfold, Offspring. It was the traditional Warped artists. And then these bands that people were watching from the comfort of their couches every afternoon. And all of a sudden, they thought they were healthy enough to go out to a 9-hour festival on a very hot summer. And my partners were so happy because financially the tour was doing great. But I was beat up so bad because there was about 250,000 people showed up that had never been. And they all came, didn't eat food, didn't go to the bathroom. The minute those bands came on stage, they passed out.
Oh, and
we were pulling them over the barricades. And that's where we developed a lot of the medical stuff that festivals use now, having medical stations right under the stages and things.
Yeah.
Before, they used to just load you on a golf cart and haul you to the tent far away. So we developed a lot of things that are used at festivals all around the world now.
I also remember, maybe I'm remembering wrong, was Easy Mac a sponsor one year? Because I remember eating Easy Mac.
Easy Mac Snack Shack.
Yeah,
I had to convince them where it was like Easy Mac Snack Shack. And it was so funny because I was always figuring out how to get these brands to support what we did. And we had little 4-ounce little samples of Easy Mac, but the buses were full of them. Everyone had Easy Mac. But it was funny because the promoters at that point were like, oh my God, you know, I think it was SFX or Live Nation. I'm trying to think was at that point. But they had, like, I was in this argument. They're like, well, people aren't going to eat food. I go, for a little bit of macaroni and cheese, you're going to let me have them. And I convinced Easy Mac, and they took a pallet of, he said, my kids love me, Easy Mac. So I had a pallet of it delivered to his driveway and left in the middle of his driveway one night. And we were able to, with a bank of little microwaves, cooking Easy Mac for everyone. Easy Mac for everyone.
I loved that. I was like, yeah, that's what I'll have for lunch.
And did you win the prize? Do you know what the grand prize was after that?
What was it?
On the boxes, there was a sweepstakes that you could win the Warped Tour in your backyard. And we had to bring a ramp, a band, and barbecue. But thank goodness, it was like in the middle of nowhere. We would have had to do all this, but they took the cash value. So probably saved, saved way more money than trying to do it.
That's amazing. Oh, there's so many. Yeah. Warped Tour is amazing. I remember, like, even as like a music industry person, like I wanted to be on Warped Tour to experience that. So I'm sure you've mentored tons of people who've gone off to do bigger things.
I think everyone in the music industry needs touring experience. I mean, when we got to a point where artists make 70 to 80% of their money on tour, you really need to understand touring. And I think for me, it was a big thing for me to be at every show. because I could make decisions, right or wrong. Sometimes you have to make them, you have to be willing to make them, but I'm there. So often, like, agent really doesn't have much to stand on when they're sitting at their home somewhere on Long Island or Malibu. I don't know where they all live, and then the manager's on the phone, and I'm in the middle of the parking lot dealing with issues.
Yeah.
And that one of those big issues was once when Eminem, he toured on Warped Tour. He had a band called D12.
Mm-hmm.
Well, D12 was Eminem, and I said D12, like, I knew their history, and I said, don't bring your beefs to this parking lot, because we had this other rapper named Isham, and I said, do not bring it to my parking lot. And we were out for about a day and a half, and we were in Philadelphia, and they jumped the guy in the parking lot. And the next day we were in New York, big show. Eminem was going to fly in and do some songs, and I kicked him off the tour, and it was a big deal. Like, people are screaming at me. I go, no, I said, keep it out of this parking lot. And you had to be willing to stand up and make those decisions. And that's why I sat there. You remember, if you were on the tour, bus one, either, I wanted people to come by, but they always felt like they were in trouble. Like, you never want to get called to bus one.
It's like going to the principal's office.
Yeah, the principal's office.
Yeah, amazing. Should we talk about the last Warped Tour?
Band's Warped Tour, Shoreline Amphitheater, San Francisco, 2019. It ended typical great Warped Tour end. It was like NOFX, everyone wanted to be the last show, but NOFX was going to come in and close the show. And they were up in Montreal the night before, and their flight got canceled. So all of a sudden we're going, oh my gosh, like, NOFX, it's a Bay Area, big show for them. We're back and forth, the flights, they were figuring it out. So we had to make a decision, and Warped Tour and private jets do not match up. The only person that had a private jet on that was Dexter from The Offspring, because he was his own pilot. So we had to decide to get a jet. So they would pay, and I threw in money, and we all figured out how to get them down to the show. But it was getting later and later. So I walked on the bus, and this is why I have such a great relationship with Sum 41 at that point. I walked in and said, you guys know all the NOFX songs. We knew that they knew all those NOFX songs. So can you guys play some NOFX songs? Because their flight's going to land at 9:23, and we're in the background trying to figure this out. And luckily we're in the Bay Area, so all of a sudden there's police, and they're like, okay, we're going to be able to land at the military base, which was closer than going into the private thing, and we'll get an escort to them. So we got them on stage, and we're going to have other singers sing NOFX songs. So it was a little chaotic, and I needed someone in a dress, so I grabbed Yungblud. And he's so young at this point. I just told him, stand here and pretend you're Fat Mike. He's like, okay. And he's got his kilt on. And the singers were all up singing. Everyone was jumping in. As I look over the hill and down into Shoreline Amphitheater, here comes a whole police escort, military escort, because they're all fans of NOFX. They rolled up to the back of the stage. The band runs up on stage, grabs the instruments, played like 25 minutes, and that ended Warped Tour. That was how we did it. Everyone pitched in. You couldn't walk up to, and I don't know, maybe other producers could walk up to someone in their dressing room and say, I need you to learn all these songs in 2 hours and be on stage. I don't know the response. And I felt that was like super cool. But at the end of that thing, I got in the next morning. I have a van now. I didn't have a tour bus. And I drove out with my wife, and I look at her and I go, I've done everything with this project I could. I knew that I was running out of things to do, and I was very comfortable driving out of that parking lot after 25 years.
I think it felt like a good full circle.
I felt, I'd done everything I could. And, full-time professorship was given to me at USC. I'm teaching 5 classes. But then this new generation maybe needs a little Warped Tour. And I was thinking the other day, it's like right now, everyone needs to mosh. And it's not only moshing physically, but Warped is moshing mentally, emotionally. We all need to mosh at some point. And with the way society is right now, we all feel like moshing. And Warped Tour gives you that outlet with all the nonprofits we have. You can just run around in circles and have a great time. You can explore, just get out. I think Ice-T needed a mosh last summer when he went to the Rage Room at the Borderlines promotion and started smashing things because he was so cool. He's a friend of mine from 1991 Lollapalooza, and he flew off set and did Warped Tour that afternoon, did both an Ice-T, I had an idea, Ice-T set into Body Count, and then flew back. But I think that's so. We're gonna give some. We're gonna now going to other countries. I'm so excited about Mexico City. I was up in
Yes.
Toronto last week, and they're excited about us coming back, especially at this point where we need to bring people together. And those countries are our closest, neighbors, and I think the fans will come together and have a good time.
How did you pick those cities? Was the battle for the cities?
No, I was thinking about when I wanted to
And how can I
expand.
convince you to go back to Ventura? Because that was a great
Wow,
one.
Ventura, gosh, I don't. That was our favorite stop.
It was. It's
But
the
it was
best.
the last cool. We had to sell all our hoodies.
Yeah.
Ventura was the show you sold your hoodies
Yes.
because we knew we were going to Phoenix next. And that point on, we didn't need to bring any hoodies. We were never going to have a cold day.
Yes.
And Ventura was great. Unfortunately, it's the size of the shows are,
Bigger than
we were
that.
80,000 people a day last year and 40,000 in D.C. And the maximum you could put in there is like 15,000. That's why we all liked it so much, because you could stand right close to the stages. And around 7 o'clock, the fog came in and it got
you're right by the
cool.
beach.
Yeah, and then we'd have a great barbecue.
Yeah.
Always a good time.
Great. Sorry, I didn't interrupt you with making you go back to Ventura, but yeah.
That's okay.
Do you see it expanding beyond even this?
I don't know. As long as I'm having fun with it again, it's getting older. It's funny, I always tell my students, it's like the only thing you're going to do is run out of time. Never enough things to do. And right now, it's funny. I'm talking to people. I talk to people all the time. Are like, I think the international side of this is what's exciting to me. And Insomniac has a good network there of people. So always talking to that, trying to slice in enough time in my van to go camp with my wife and hang out. It's who knows where we go with it, but it's no pressure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the coolest thing with Insomniac as a partner. There, Kevin, do what you want with it. Like, just have fun.
Nice.
It's a lot of work, though, too. It's not
Yeah.
always fun.
I remember Warped Tour was so great to be on. I was just a blogger, but it was also like this, getting your needs
You were
met.
just a blogger.
I was-
Everyone had a big part. You had deadlines every day, right?
I had deadlines.
Yeah. So
But, waking up, figuring out where everything is, trying to feed yourself and shower yourself, and then trying to see all the bands that I needed to see in each day. By the way, I was on 2008, which was The Academy Is, Gym Class Heroes, Against Me, Angels in Air. It was the greatest year.
Oh, yeah. That was the year in 2008. Academy was out with us. And they had a yoga person out with us. I was trying to be all healthy,
they?
so we brought the yoga person on that tour. And then she turned into a drunk and ended up marrying one of the guys in Academy Is. So
My favorite Warped Tour ever was, I think, it was the Gorge was one of the stops that year.
yeah.
And I woke up because I didn't have a very early wake time, fortunately. But to the Academy Is sound checking, and the sound carried, and I walked out to the Gorge, and I was like,
God, you were on a country club trip if you were waking up to the
"This is
sound
the
coming up.
best day of my life."
Well,
Yeah.
the Gorge for me was, I saw it in Lollapalooza when I went there, and it was one of the most beautiful places. And when I had the opportunity to bring it there, I was like, all these punk bands may never have a chance to
This
play
is
the
true.
Gorge.
Yeah.
We did things like, we did Warped Tour at Red Rocks.
Yeah.
Put the skate ramp at the top of the mountain once. So I'd want to take the bands to places they may never have a chance to play. Now, many have, thank goodness. But the Gorge, the sunrise, sunset, going behind the stage, you probably remember I'd always bring the tiki bar out on the stage and we'd have a cool, mellower band play around sunset. I called it the Sunset Cruise.
Yeah.
And all the crew would gather and the bands would gather and we would have some super chill, and it might be, trying to think Morgan Heritage or one of the reggae bands, because I always had a mix of reggae bands, and it would just bring the tempo of the show to this vibe, like trying to show everyone that we could have just a breather between it all.
Yeah.
And that was always a special moment. And this year it was a big thing when Sublime did the Sunset Cruise in Long Beach at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock when the sun was setting. It was back and forth. I timed it and said, you have to play at this time. And it was a little bit back and forth with the management, and we figured it out. They thought they should play, and I said no. And it was epic to see, the band play up on that stage at sunset.
Is it easier to get the bands to play these weekend things than it was to get them to go on a whole tour?
I don't know. Back then it was like everyone wanted to go out on that whole tour. I mean, you had 2 months to go play for 500,000 to 600,000 people. The agent's manager loved it because they just gave their band to me and didn't hear. And usually, and I do have to say that most of the time, the bands say the best time of our lives was touring on that tour.
Yeah.
And last summer, some of the nicest things people said to me, one of them that stuck with me was one of the bands walked up and said, "We play a lot of festivals because that's part of our business now.
Yeah.
We came home to Warped Tour." And that felt really special. They came home. We had the backstage party. Backstage last year, we had Rise Against did a set, All American Rejects, Tyson, after all those great backyard shows, started at USC at one of them. And then I ended and talking to Tyson, I go, "Wasn't that cool that I had you play last at night in Long Beach?" He goes, "One thing you left out when you told us was that we were playing last." And I said, "Oh, you would have gotten really nervous." And they killed it, and then they played a backstage party, and I had to bring the Agro Lights play because that's that reggae vibe. We had that barbecue, and they were playing backstage, and you're just dancing with your friends, and going, and looking back at it for me, hey, it was a lot of work and things, but my daughters grew up working on that tour. I think you probably know some of my Sierra and Sabrine, and my wife says, "I never thought I'd want my daughters on a rock and roll tour," but she actually said she felt safe out there because there were so many people looking out for them, and she knew where they were versus trying to figure out what they were doing on a summer night.
You're like, they're working for Dad. It's fine. Yeah, a Warped Tour is a lot of great memories, and I hope.
What's your favorite memory?
Other than the waking up to the Academia's sound checking?
Yeah. Any of the barbecues stick out?
Barbecues. I remember the Agro Lights always playing backstage, and they always created this super chill vibe, oh, the show's over, but we're here playing music. I crowd surfed the first time during Newfound Glory at Warped Tour.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of Warped Tour. My first Warped Tour was in 311, Good Charlotte. Who else was on that tour? Alien Ant Farm. Was that 2000 or 2001?
Yeah, 2000. You're asking me now. It's like the years do start to blend together in the lineups, but great.
That was my first one, I think. And I went every year from then on. So it's hard to... We'd have to make this a separate show, like Marquee Memories Warped Tour specifically. But yeah. Are you going to any other shows upcoming as a fan?
Oh my gosh. I just went to a great show, the Grammy Hall of Fame induction this last week, and just watching, just getting to see, Teddy Swims. It's like, love Teddy Swims, and just some of the artists that performed at that were fantastic. And I think sometimes in the industry we start taking to go to live music for granted. I always ask people, do you get to go to Coachella? Or do you want to go to Coachella? Because we're very lucky to get to go to shows. Unfortunately for me, and I tell people, I begin a class every day with, did you wear your earplugs this weekend? Or did you, wear them this weekend? Is from all those nights, working, 320 nights a year. And there's a photo of me at the Hollywood Palladium recently someone sent me, and it's Kurt Cobain playing guitar on stage, and me always watching the artist as well as the crowd, but my head's right next to the side fill. And that's where I was every night, because I'm looking at the audience to make sure they're doing all right in the band. And tinnitus is just really horrible. The ringing in my ears is real. So get your earplugs. They're not, so what? They're going to save you so you can enjoy it more.
Yes.
I go to a few shows, not as many as I'd like right now.
How do you keep the fan mindset? I feel like as my job too, I do that. There's the music I genuinely like, but then also a respect for all of the genres and all of them.
One of the big things for me was taking that break in 2019. I decided I was just listening to music to book. Because I also had Mayhem Festival, had Taste of Chaos. I was constantly listening to things to book versus enjoy. So that next year, I got our Sprinter van. I made a bunch of playlists, and I got into all kinds of music, everything, Hosiers and Teddy Swims, and I was listening to some of the newer punk stuff. I mean, having access to so much music now, it's the good and the bad, It's hard to stand out as some artists right now that are so good. I just heard a new single with Juliet Sims, and Andy just did a Black Veil Bride single. And I go, this song is so good. I just hope enough people get to hear it. But I've become a fan again of music, and I can hear things a little differently right now. Of course, I'm not booking for myself. I realized that early on. You look. All I did was look at the barricades. I like looking at barricades and watching the front row singing.
Yeah.
And singing is loud. And I said, that's when we get older, we tend to start judging music. My peers of growing up, oh, that music sucks, or this one, my kids listen to this. I go, look, they're listening to it, and if they're singing like we used to sing to Black Flag or those bands, we can't judge that. We can't judge that. That's what they're listening to. But a lot of things now is, you've got, Warped Tour, the parents are into the bands, you know? I mean, for us, it was like funny. I didn't know if we were going to take, but, my daughter turned me on to We the Kings way back when.
They played the last Warped Tour, right?
Yeah, they're always welcome because our favorite song as a family is Check Yes, Juliet.
Nice.
We all go, no matter what, we all stop and sing it together, because I remember walking by the bedroom when she was sitting with some friends, and I look at them and they were singing just so passionately about that song, and they turned me on to the band actually way back when. And then, now we all go out and sing that song when we can together.
That was my last Warped Tour memory was, singing If You Like Me, Say If You Like Me. Was it? I don't know. Anyway, it was a big sing along with We the Kings on the last Ventura Warped Tour. Was the last one.
Yeah,
Great.
Always good memories there.
Yeah. I'm happy some of these, in addition to Warped Tour coming back, Cartel is coming back, the Academy is coming back.
Oh yeah, they're going to be back with us this summer.
Yes.
Looking forward to the Academy is.
Well, I've asked you more questions than I wrote down. Well, thank you so much for sharing memories with me today, and I'm excited for Warped Tour.
Thank you so much for having me on.